Hello, thinkers. Welcome back to the Apex Mind. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of why I left atheism, what was my relationship with God before I became an atheist, what was my relationship with God and religion while I was an atheist, and ultimately when and how I decided to become a non atheist. So, the story starts at the ripe age of 4 years old. As a child, I was fascinated with God to the point that I wanted to be an avatar of God. Because the first story that came to me was of Vishnu. So, Vishnu, for those who don't know, within our religion, within Hinduism, is the preserver or the ultimate God within Vaishnavism, right? He is the one who makes sure that the world runs the way it is, he is the universe itself. Now, Vishnu, whenever the balance of the world is like haywire, he takes the avatar of like different beings. Sometimes he becomes a fish, sometimes he becomes a boar, sometimes he is born in the form of a human being on earth to restore the balance, kill the bad guys, make sure everything is okay, and all of those things. So, the tale goes that Vishnu is going to incarnate on earth 10 times, and so far he has done it 9 times. And there are four yugas are time periods for the universe. And in those four periods, the first is the Satyug, the age of truth, the second is the Dwapar Yug, the third is the Treta Yug, and the fourth and the final Yug that we are in right now is the Kali Yug, the age of deceit, of maximum evil and corruption within people. And Vishnu is going to take the god Vishnu is going to take the avatar of Kalki in order to vanquish evil from the world. Now, because Vishnu had taken 9 avatars already and the last avatar was there, and I heard those stories, me being the 4-year-old kid I wanted to believe that I was the 10th avatar of Vishnu. And I would make up stories in my head of how I'm going to defeat evil and whatnot. Then you grow up, reality hits, you realize, oh, I'm not even able to score 100 out of 100 in certain examinations. How the hell can I be God? And then you humble down. So, but my fascination was to religion was not simply limited to me wanting to be an avatar, but it was also to the point that there was a greater meaning to life. Because without a god, without a religion, without a grander narrative, what is the world if not just like random people interacting and random processes happening for random reasons? Hell, you can make up the story of life and how life evolved and survival is what it is, but just from a purely scientific and materialistic point of view, there is no point to life. Random shit happened, that is the reason universe came into being, and random shit happened, that is why life came into being. And among that random shit, there is the random shit of survival and reproduction that we are following, and we are no more different than animals. We do things to survive and reproduce, and it's a boring ass story which I did not like. So, and I used to love stories, whether it was Digimon, whether it was Pokemon, whether it was Dragon Ball, anything with meaning, anything with a grander purpose, anything with an answer. And that is perhaps the most defining trait I have even to this day. I look for patterns, as you already know on the channel, patterns are everywhere. I try to find meaning because without meaning, it's a nihilistic world. And I'm not saying a nihilistic world is a bad world, but a nihilistic world is simply a boring world to me. It has all the answers there, and there is no point. So anyway, I I was fascinated with the idea of religion, of God, of all of those stories. But as you grow up and your ability to question, your ability to understand, your ability to think increases further and further, and you realize the elders around you might not be as intelligent as you once perceived them to be. They are not all knowing. You start asking questions. When I was 13 years old and I was in a cousin's wedding, there was a priest who used to tell us the story of how when Lord Vishnu incarnated on earth in the form of Sri Ram, that whenever he used to walk, there used to be a dark cloud that was on his head so that he did not feel any form of like warmth, or he did not feel any form of harsh rays of sun, and that cloud used to follow him everywhere. Now 13-year-old me found that to be extremely stupid. So I asked him, that is not possible, bro. Like, okay, not bro, but yeah, that is not possible. How is that possible? Like, what are clouds? They are a water vapor. They like form. They are not voluntary creatures. So how can that be possible? And he was not able to answer that question for me. It left a very bad taste in my mouth. And post that, I started questioning a lot of things, and I come to realize that this idea of a being a human, not a human, but just a being creating the world is extremely childish, is extremely, it's not something that I like. And even more so than me not liking it, it just simply did not make any sense to me. So the early teenage me went on a mission to make sense of everything. I loved and I was fascinated by science for a very long time. So I wanted to become a cosmologist, and I started studying about things. And by studying, I mean looking shit up on the internet about black holes and wormholes and all of those fringe theories. But science gave me answers that religion never gave me. And that was very fascinating to me, right? And for a long time, I would have arguments with religious nut jobs on the internet, 30, 40, 50-year old people who really wanted to believe in religion but who did not want to think critically. And that is one thing that remains true for me even today. The one kind of a person that I hate the most is the one who refuses to think critically. If you refuse to think critically, let it be know that I hate you. But yeah, and that is the reason I went deeper and deeper into atheism and more or less skepticism. But this is the thing about skepticism: skepticism is not loyal to anyone. So I was not loyal to science either. And then questions started piling up for me which were not even answerable by science. Questions like, if I see this box in my hand and I perceive it, the reason I perceive it the way I do is because of my sensory organs, is because of my eyes, and all of that making up my reality, right? So even other people are part of this. That is the reason I assume a world to exist. So am I not assuming that my eyes, ears, and brain are giving me the right information about reality? And what about people who hallucinate? They also see stuff, right? Why do we not believe that whatever they're seeing is right? We don't believe that because we don't see that. So is reality democratically voted upon? That started bothering me a lot. And around 2 years ago, I would assume, 2 years ago, no, around 1 year ago, 1.5 year ago. So it was around February of 2024. I reached a point that one day I was fascinated to the point that I wanted to understand where the religion people are coming from. Because even though I believed in science and skepticism, and a lot of other people did, it was on a foundation of a lot of assumptions like the peer review system is right, assumptions that all of these institutions are not lying to me, assumptions that uh, I mean, I read a theory in a book, they are like guaranteeing me that this has been tested upon, but am I going through the process and the loopholes to check if this is actually being performed or not? I am not, right? So I am also taking it on faith, even though I assume my thing to be more rigorous, and perhaps it is. I myself am not rigorous about checking for it. So I picked up the Bhagavad Gita. It was not this version of Gita, actually. It was I don't have it right now. It was another version of Gita, like Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I decided that I am going to experiment. An experiment in the sense that I am going to read this book. I am going to consider all the shlokas and everything written in it, like I consider scientific laws and Newton's laws and whatnot. And that would be the basis of my understanding. That would be the assumptions that I would take to be 100% real. And then I'll look at reality from that point of view. All of my skepticism would be pointed outside of it, right? This is the mental rewiring I wanted to do as an experiment to see what happens. How can I get into the mindset of a believer? And I did actually. For one entire week, I was doing this every single day. I was reading the book, I was assuming it all to be true, and I was getting into the mindset of a believer. And this part that I'm going to share now is probably something that all of you are going to be skeptical towards, and I want you to be skeptical towards it. If you just believe in me, then you're probably not my audience. And that is that I did have a spiritual experience towards the end of that week, of the same God that is within the Bhagavad Gita, which is Krishna. I will not go into the details of it because it has been advised to me that I should not be sharing these things out loud, and I will respect it in the name of tradition. But understand this, I can guarantee you one thing: it was not a dream and it was not my imagination. Could it have been a hallucination? Perhaps. But it was definitely not an imagination and not a dream. So I did have an experience. Either I was able to, within 1 week, create a self induced hallucination, or some spiritual experience happened. But whatever it was fascinating. So I started researching on this a lot more. A couple of months later, my father passed away. And when he did, and I went onto the cremation ground, again, a lot of traumatic things happened. Something very akin to a ceremonial thing in Tantra also happened to me. And for the next 15 days, I was extremely philosophical. I mean, again, this is again something I want you to take on skepticism. Do not believe me. But I felt within those 15 days very serene and someone who had the absolute knowledge of all philosophy in the world. You could have asked me anything, I would have been able to give you a point of view that was not natural to me, that was not natural to anyone, and that was like someone else was speaking through me. I do not know where that came from, and again, take that on skepticism. Following that, I became a lot more open to theology. I became a lot more open to all of those different things, and I started reading a bit more on these things. But more than reading, I liked dissecting these things. Right, around that time, I think February of this year is when I started speaking a lot to ChatGPT, right? And I know all about the AI induced what do you call it, psychosis, in the sense that it just agrees with you. That is the like point of this language learning model. It is too nice, it agrees with you, and a lot of people believe their own stupid theories on the basis of that. What I did through that phase was, every single time I would ask it something, or every single time I would say something, I would add the condition that it has to be non pandering, that it has to be very ruthless, that it has to not do retroactive reasoning, and that it has to do first principles reasoning. And I would not even refer to myself in first person, I would refer to it as person A. And even after all of that, I know it is conditioned to be a certain way. But because I am the sort of person, as you already know on the channel, who loves dialogue and learns through dialogue, that really helped me. It was around that time also that I wrote and published 4 philosophical papers who are there in on Phil papers. So one of them, that if you want to look it up, it's titled The Observer Observation Duality. You'll like it. But that is the time I got a lot more into philosophy. I was always the philosophical kind, but this is when I really wanted to get into philosophy. And starting March, I started my channel. And you can see all I did on my channel: question, answer, dialogue, patterns, and everything. And this is also when the atheism started slipping by because I understood one thing by studying philosophy is that I understood metaphysics, if that makes sense. I understood the Platonic forms, right? If I imagine something to be a cat, it's not simply the neurons firing, it might be, but there is also a concept of a cat that I have in my head that I refer to again and again. And that how close something is to that concept is how cat-ish it is to me, and that is the Platonic form. And similarly, God to me ended up being truth, because when I researched a bit about different religions, what does Christianity say? God says I am. God says I am the truth. Same with Hinduism, Parabrahman. If you look into it, all of these things are pointing towards truth to be God. These people were not looking at God simply like a creator who created everything, a being floating outside of the universe. That is a very reductionist way of looking at theology. Theology is not that. You know what theology is? Theology is philosophy that is quite a bit older. And even within science, we have a lot of assumptions, of very fundamental assumptions, like that this world is real. And and the reason we believe the world is real is because it appears that way to us, but we don't question even that. So the point of philosophy is to question even that, and the point of theology and religion is to answer those questions. So that is why I got into a philosophy a lot. I got into metaphysics a lot. I started questioning everything as I did on my channel, and therefore, the God as the universal truth axiom came back into my life. And then I studied more about Vedanta, about Advaita, about all of these things, and I realized these are not the same as what I understood them to be all those years ago. They were, in fact, talking about a philosophical and a metaphysical understanding of a God. And recently, something slapped me across the face again. They do believe in deities. Yes, apparently they believe in existence of creatures beyond us, which are real but which are not ultimately God. I mean, they can be God, they can't be God, and all of that bullshit. All of that I'll dive deeper into some other video, but even that actually makes sense on the basis of how I understand logic to work. The world is a lot more complex than I gave it credit for, and at the very least, God can be defined as the ultimate truth axiom. And therefore, I am not an atheist, because to be an atheist is to essentially be a nihilist or nihilist confirming. And because I'm not an atheist, I would consider myself a theist. And because I have Vedantic roots and I'm studying these things, and I'm doing certain practices these days in order to prove to myself or validate a certain form of belief. If I do succeed in that, I will call myself a full-fledged theist. But right now, these days, I am a theist in the capacity that I am not an atheist. So this is why I left atheism, because atheism ultimately reduces itself to nihilism. And because atheism also does not because atheism in its practice also is a form of belief. And the point here is to question everything and to reach a conclusion. And I can't do that while being an atheist. So this was my story of why I left atheism. Do let me know what you think about it. Question all of the weird experiences I've told to you. I want you to be skeptical about this, because the ethos of this channel is to keep asking, keep questioning, keep analyzing, because, as I always say, patterns, they're everywhere.